e4, let's go. Okay, we're playing the Smith-Morra, ladies and gentlemen, once again. The last game, for those of you who weren't here for yesterday's speedrun, we won a game in the Smith-Morra in about 18 moves against the 2000. So, yes, and we have another Smith-Morra. Okay, knight f3. Let's go again. d6, bishop c4. And our last opponent played knight f6, which is bad. Or which is not terrible, but a precursor to problems. So e6 is obviously the main line, and we castle. Then we go queen e2 and rook d1. That is the principal setup, knight f6. Okay, now we go queen e2 if I remember correctly. Okay, queen e2. This is mainline Smith-Morra. And the point, of course, of queen e2, if you're not a Morra player, is to put the rook on d1. Why put the rook on d1? In order to x-ray black's queen. One of the main tenets of the Morra is that with the c-file being open, the black queen does not have a good safe square. Because on c7, it is vulnerable to a second rook that appears on c1 and to the move knight b5. On b6, it walks into bishop e3. And on a5, it's just generally awkward and can walk into all sorts of things. So we're essentially playing against black's queen. And our opponent is stumped. So queen e2 clearly surprised him. Let's see what he comes up with. Question, did I read Esserman's book on the Morra? Bishop e7, we go rook d1. No, I haven't, but I've looked at bits and pieces. So castles. Now this, if I remember correctly, is a mistake. Black has to address the threat of e5 here because bad things will befall him if he does. And that's why black's main move is actually to push their pawn to e5 preemptively, which creates a lot of weaknesses, and that's the main line. If black doesn't do it, then we shove this pawn forward to e5, and look at the pressure that we've already developed on black's pieces. Now, knight e8. Okay, so let's be precise. I think a lot of people here would be tempted to play bishop f4. That would be a very bad move. Why would that be a bad move? Because black will be able to push d5 and establish a solid center. That is the worst case scenario. So we cannot allow that to happen. So we have to take on d6 first. Then after black recaptures on d6, then we can go bishop f4 and put pressure on whichever piece appears on d. Okay, so he takes with a bishop, which is interesting. Let's consider the various options in our position. So, well, from a general standpoint, I think it's quite obvious that we probably want to exploit the pressure on the d file, right? Now, we have several ways of doing that. I actually do not like bishop f4 as much. The reason I don't like bishop f4 is because black can just shift the queen down to e7. And, okay, we could trade bishops, but what have we really gained from that trade? So it would be a better idea here to give up our knight for black's bishop in order to at least preserve the bishop pair. I know that there's a theory move here. I don't know what it is. I would imagine that it's knight b5. I would imagine that it's knight b5 or knight e4 and taking the bishop on d6, getting the bishop pair. Now, I wouldn't say that white is winning there or white is much better, but at least we have the bishop pair and we have a pretty big initiative. So let's go knight b5, knight e4. Let's go knight b5. I don't think it really matters which direction we go with our knight. Now, if black does not play queen e7, then obviously we're going to take on d6 and go bishop f4, and the pin is going to become deadly. So queen e7 here is de rigueur. Logical. Yeah, so some of you are pointing out this interesting idea. Once we eliminate the bishop from d6, we could think about where our bishop belongs, right? And you might say, well, isn't it obvious? f4? But f4 is not the only square. If we had b3 in, we would be able to get this bishop to a3. That could potentially create a devastating pin against the knight on d6. Unfortunately, that takes 2 moves. But let's keep that in mind, the possibility of deploying the bishop to a3. Queen e7 played. Good stuff by our opponent. Now, we should definitely take the bishop. If we don't take the bishop will move. And then why did we play knight b5, right? So we take the bishop. Okay, and now an very important position. So we need to answer a preliminary question, which is, are we going to preserve our light-squared bishop? And I would imagine that the answer to that question is no, because if we waste a move, actually, wait a second. It depends where we put it. Because if we play the move bishop to d3, right? If we play bishop c4 to d3, the move that concerned me is pawn to e5. Why is that a concerning move to me? Well, the reason it's concerning to me is because e5 opens up black's light-squared bishop, and the worst thing that we can allow here is for black to completely consolidate. You know what I'm saying? So I have an interesting idea. what if we go not bishop d3, but bishop b3? Who can tell me what is the chief difference? What happens if black plays e5 here, which is not unlikely. I think our opponent might still go e5. What happens in the event of e5? Well, in the event of e5, we have an additional resource. Nobody knows. So think about it this exactly. The bishop on b3 is going to pin the pawn on f7. What does that mean? Well, that means we can go bishop g5, attacking the queen, and black does not have the critical resource f6. Black will have to move the queen, but the queen doesn't have that many squares to move to. It has to keep its defense of the knight, which means its only square after e5, bishop g5 is queen c7, but then we'll be able to take the pawn on e5 with our knight. So that's my idea. And you have to reverse engineer this, because looking at this move in and of itself, you might say, well, this looks stupid. You're just staring at the pawn on e6. But it's a prophylactic move, right? We are preventing a very important consolidating move. Okay, b6 by our opponent. Clearly, black wants to develop to b7. This is a fascinating position, because the question is, are we going to be able to conduct our initiative without allowing... I mean, if black needs two moves. If black plays bishop b7 and like rook d8, he consolidates, he's up a pawn, so we have to step on the gas pedal. That's what it means to carry out an initiative. You cannot let your opponent breathe. Well, what does that mean in the context of this position? Well, that probably means developing with tempo. So I know a lot of you are probably thinking bishop f4 right now, and I like that concept, but what I like even more is starting with bishop g5. I like to start with this move, not because it attacked the queen. We provoke f6, and then we drop our bishop back to f4. And also, this justifies the placement of the bishop on b3. e5 is now illegal. Why did we provoke f6? For the simple reason that the e6 pawn is now a major weakness. Why is that important? Because it prevents black, or at least slows black down, from developing the light-squared bishop. Knight f7, good move by our opponent, though. Now we need to keep our foot on the gas pedal. We need to keep making moves that create threats and bring pieces into the game. But I think our opponent is playing extremely well here. Rook ac1 seems to fit the bill. And we're continuing to put pressure. All of our pieces are now in the game. Look how nicely everything is positioned. The knight is hanging. If bishop b7, then we take the pawn on e6 and we're groovy. The move that I'm slightly more concerned about is bishop to d7, because that not only defends the knight, but it keeps the e6 pawn protected. Now, after bishop d7, I know that many of you are probably thinking, we could still take on e6, little deflection tactic. Okay, knight a5. I think that's a mistake. So we can push that aside, because that is not what our opponent played. Ooh, and I see some juicy stuff. Ooh. Oh my god, I see some really cool tactics here. Okay, so the tempting move is rook c7, right? Rook c7 is incredibly tempting. But let's not stop there. What happens after rook c7? Does this win the game? No, black plays queen e8. Rook c7, queen e8. And if you look at that resulting position very carefully, it's actually not obvious that there... I mean, we need to find a follow-up there if we play rook c7. Is there a follow-up in that position? I think there is, but bishop d5 here, as many of you are pointing out, looks incredibly good. Now, after bishop d5, black has a counter resource, bishop a6, with the idea of meeting queen takes a6 with e takes d5. But after bishop d5, bishop a6, what additional move does white now have? Remembering from, that's actually why we played bishop g5 earlier, right? This is a recurring theme. The e6 pawn is tender, so we can simply grab it, and we're going to have a huge advantage in the endgame. Let's go. Bishop d5 it is. Now you might say, wait a second, what about bishop b7 here? Well, bishop b7, we have many moves. We can still take on e6. But we can also contemplate going rook c7 there, which it's not a given that that's the best move, because black could even sack the queen for the piece and the rook, but we're spoiled for choice after bishop e7. We're totally spoiled for choice. Okay, bishop a6, our opponent finds it. Okay, we play queen takes e6. We transition into an endgame where we have a big advantage. And look at how poorly black's minor pieces are going to be placed. We have this pin going on the knight. We have the potential threat of playing b2, b4. And when your opponent's pieces are on the rim like this, you can often use your pawns to limit them even further and to trap them. Rook a e8. So just because the queens are off the board does not mean that we should take our foot off the gas pedal. We should continue keeping the initiative alive. What that means in the context of this position, this pin is very important. Through the prism of this pin, we're able to keep black's entire position tied down. So I would like to keep this pin alive. So what's a nice move that activates one of our other pieces without getting rid of the pin? Well, yeah, we could play bishop d5. But what I like even more is the move knight to d4. And there is a very specific reason that I like this move more than bishop d5. It actually creates a secondary threat that can be very hard to see. So I'm hoping our opponent plays king h8 here. I feel like that would be a very natural move, which, if I calculated it correctly, would result in the loss of a minor piece. What about bishop d6? Well, bishop d6 is also a threat. Yeah, bishop d6 is another threat, for sure. Good catch. Good eye. Bishop c, yeah, that's a great move. I was hoping our opponent wouldn't find that, to be honest. I think that's the only move. Yeah, our opponent is playing phenomenal. This is very annoying, actually. Somehow black is surviving this. Aha. No, I think I see what we need to do. I think I see what we need to do. What should we do? Well, again, our top priority should be to preserve the pin. We have several ways of doing that. I love the move rook e1 here. Rook e1 is such a classy move because it keeps everything intact. But rook e1, I'm a little bit worried about rook to d8. And the knight on d4 is very tender. And you guys are like, well, who put the knight there? But we can simply go bishop d5. We can simply drop the bishop back to d5 now, which is a move that many of you proposed on the previous move. I think it's still good. I think there's nothing wrong with this move. The one thing that concerns me is still rook d. Okay, bishop b7. Yeah, I knew you would play that. And now we can win the exchange. Who sees a way that we can win the exchange? And it's not bishop to d6. This would be a mistake on account of bishop takes d5. And remember that black would get two pieces for the rook. Instead, we go knight e6. Maybe not the best move. Maybe taking in rook c7 would have been even more precise. But I know for a fact that this wins material. And it's about time that we win some material. Now, how does this work? Well, you might say, okay, bishop takes d5. We take the rook on f8. The bishop is going to be hanging. So if black takes the knight, we take the bishop. Our back rank is safe. That's important to establish. Both of our rooks are on the back rank, which means that one of them could depart the back rank and we'd still be okay, right? But the thing you have to establish is that after bishop d5, knight f2, for example, bishop takes a2, is the knight going to be trapped? Well, I already made that determination. It's not, because the knight could have escaped to d7. Okay, our opponent just folds over. King takes f8 is not serious. And now we're up a full exchange. This is completely winning. Knight c4. Obviously, we are not taking it. Now, the way to win such positions quickly is to aim for maximum piece activity as quickly as possible. So rather than going b3 here, which I think is an automatic instinct for a lot of people, rather than playing the move b3, I think a more decisive way to approach this position would be to go rook d7. Just get the rook to the 7th rank. And the point is that once the knight, I mean, this is jabate. We jabate the knight. Once it takes on b2, it is stranded on b2. It can't go back, assuming we make some luft, right? If we don't make any luft, the knight can come back to c4, and then we won't be able to capture it. So rook takes a7, knight c4 is not efficient. What we should do here is just make some luft. And I like to play the move h4 in such situations because it also discourages black from pushing his own kingside pawns. In fact, g5 is likely, but I'll show you what happens if you place g5. Our next move is going to be what? Essentially, against anything, our next move is going to be rook c to c7. And what I want you to notice, if you're trying to extract lessons for how to play the endgame, what you should notice is that I am not going for any pawns yet. Right? I had several opportunities to play materialistically. The first came here. We could have played b3 to preserve our b pawn. The second came here. We could have taken an a7. In both situations, I'm prioritizing piece activity at all costs over, meaningless and temporary positional gain. Now, and only now, when push has come to shove, okay, we can take on a7, but only because it serves the secondary purpose of keeping the rook on the 7th rank, not because this is a pawn. We also had the move bishop d6 check, by the way, which would have won on the spot. Knight d3, and I saw this, and there is a key detail. What should we do in this position? Have we succumbed to a fork? Have we missed this? Yeah, rook d1 actually is winning, although it's a little bit convoluted. That's not the best move. Don't lose sight of our main goal. which is to play rook c7. We play rook c7, attacking, counterattacking. Counterattacking, then knight on f7, and the game is over. That's it. Once we get our rooks to the 7th, we're just going to take everything on the 7th rank, and it's going to be mate. Piggies on the 7th. Okay, so knight takes f4. We obviously take on f7. Okay, so how do we win this efficiently? I think some people in such a position have the instinct to trade rooks. We absolutely do not need to trade rooks. We simply start by taking all of his pawns. And now, again, rather than... Okay, we can trade rooks. Yeah, we can play rook g7. If you want to trade rooks, which is the simplest way to win this, at this point, trading a pair of rooks is very simple. We play rook a to g7 check. And now who can tell me what is the way to trade rooks in such a position? And this is a method, by the way, that you can apply in rook endgames across many different types of endgames. Rook h8 check, yes. With 30 seconds on the clock, it's a good idea to trade here. Now, what should be the approach to winning this position? The approach is to create an outside passer, so we should create the passed a pawn, and then we should push that pawn to promotion. Yeah, this is easy. Plenty of time. We push the pawn. I'm going to throw in the move g3 for good measure. Rook b6. Now, notice that I'm not pre-moving. This is very important. Look at the relationship between the rook and the knight. This is something to remember. The knight just cannot access any key squares. Now we play a6. I'm not in time trouble. This is not called time trouble. This is... I can take 3 seconds on a move and I'd be fine. Which is exactly what I'm doing, in fact. All right, we're good. I love the acting like no time trouble every day. No, I also could have played a lot faster when we won the exchange, so relax, everybody. If I wanted to, I could have played much, much faster from this position onwards. Thank you, Anjali. But I will alert you if I'm in actual time pressure. Like, you'll probably see it on my face. I'll be actually more focused and intense. Okay. All right, so Mark, I'm sure, analyzes the move e5 here, or rather, castles. Okay, so the main move here is e5. There is also queen c7, which is a sideline, but the main move is e5. And then the main line goes h3 castles, bishop e3, bishop e6, bishop e6, f e6. Okay, there's like a gazillion different sub-variations here. You can check out Mark's book. This is the main line, or the traditional main line. Now, the question is, wouldn't e5 make a backwards pawn? Yes, it would, right? I'm not denying that e5 has drawbacks, but the priority for black is to prevent white from playing e5. And you are up a pawn, so it's okay that you now have a backward pawn, if that makes sense. Okay. Castles, e5. And maybe e5 isn't even the best move. I mean, I wouldn't jump to that conclusion. It's just so natural that I would be shocked if it wasn't. But I'm saying in the opening Explorer that bishop f4 is also a move, apparently. Let me see. e5 is best. So we're being told by the resident Smith-Morra expert that e5 is best. Okay. So e5, knight e8, ed6. I wonder where we deviated from Mark's book. Okay, so let me look at the index here. Yeah, e5, knight e8, e6, bishop d6. Knight b5, exclam. So knight b5 is correct. Queen e7. This is mayhem in the Morra, Mark Esserman. Bishop g5, exclam. So this is a mistake. Taking on d6 is a mistake. Or maybe not a mistake, but not accurate. Bishop g5 is the best move. So we induce f6. Oh, so this is an idea that we applied in the game. But this is a better application of it. Bishop b8, rook ac1. The heavy peace storm never relents. The Morra rooks reach their natural squares, and the game of hide and seek nears its conclusion. Hide and seek with the queen, by the way. I mentioned this at the start. The gambitier now menaces bishop c5, followed by bishop takes e6 check, winning. So for instance, a6, bishop c5. Queen c5, bishop takes e6 check. Bang. The knight on b5 is just very nicely placed. By the way, this is probably why you want knight b5 as opposed to knight e4. Use the process of comparison. Don't just like... You can compare. Like knight e4, queen e7. If you do the same thing here... Actually, I guess this does have actually a plus to putting the knight on e4, which is that bishop b8, now there's bishop c5 skewering the queen. Yeah, the writing is beautiful. So maybe knight e4 is also good, but I would trust Mark. Yeah, so bishop g5, f6, bishop b3. Thank you, Dan fan. Rook ac1, b6. Bishop b3 exclam. White remains a pawn down, but the rooks are chewing up the board, creating decisive threats against black's minor pieces. Black is bullied to the back rank, a theme you will see throughout the book. Bishop b7. Bang. 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 Plus minus. Oh my god, what a line. And the hunt finally ends. White's forces doggedly swarmed the queen, never letting her out of their sights. Beautiful. This is a really cool line. So the move is bishop g5. And this is the benefit of actually having chess books, right? Having access to information. Beautiful line. So bishop g5 is the move. We decided to take and go bishop b3 because I'm a plebe and I don't know the Smith-Morra. But this is a very difficult position for black, regardless. So once again, the idea of bishop b3 as opposed to bishop d3 is that I wanted to discourage black from playing e5. I wanted to discourage black from playing e5. Now, does it make sense why e5 should be discouraged? Like, why is this a scary move? Well, this is a scary move because it controls more of the center, and mainly it opens up black's light-squared bishop. So if we think about the sources of white's compensation, right? Why do we have full compensation for the pawn here? Well, we can point to a couple of things. The first is that we have the bishop pair. In particular, we have an uncontested dark-squared bishop, so black has weaknesses on a lot of the dark squares. So for example, if the queen ever goes to c7, we have bishop f4. That's all because we have a dark-squared bishop. Black is a bad light-squared bishop, which is hemmed in by his own pawns. We have the d file, and we also kind of have dibs on the c file. Like, we can bring our rook faster to c1. All of that stuff kind of evaporates if we allow black to play e5. So that's why I played bishop b3. Because if e5, then we play bishop to g5. f6 is illegal. That's the whole point. And queen c7 runs into knight takes e5. I think we're in good shape here. Okay. So b6. Black tries to his light squared bishop, and now bishop g5. Simple concept, provoking f6, and now dropping the bishop back to f4. Just make a note to yourself. This is important, right? Sometimes you can ask yourself, like, you know you want to develop the bishop here, but can you provoke a weakness first and then drop the piece back to the square you initially wanted to put it on, right? That's like a pattern that you can use in many, many different types of positions. And it should make sense why provoking f6 is good for us. It could backfire. It actually could backfire. Under what circumstances, who can answer me this question? Under what circumstances could provoking f6 actually backfire? If what piece was on what square, would we not want to allow the move f6? Very good. If the black king was on h8, we would actually be helping black play e5. So everything is relative in chess. Everything depends on the position at hand. Exactly, very good. So if the king was on h8, we would have to settle for bishop f4. But here, because the king is on g8, we play this. Knight f7. Now we bring our rook into the game with tempo. Again, here we directly use the weakness of e6. If bishop b7, bang, we take on e6. Bishop d7 was the move that I expected from our opponent. So did you see bishop d5 with the opponent playing? No, I honestly only saw rook c7, but I knew that we would have other resources as well because our position is so overwhelming. Okay, so what do we do? What do we do if black plays bishop d7? What is our idea here? Who can propose an interesting move here? Let's analyze this position a little bit. Okay, so I want to hear a couple of candidate moves. I want to hear a couple of candidate moves, and then I'll tell you what I was thinking. I'll give you guys a second to think about this. I think I had a really interesting idea in mind. Okay, so bishop d6 blunders the bishop. Knight takes d6. So the sort of move that you would play if you're tactically alert is bishop takes c6. Bishop takes c6 is wrong. The problem with bishop takes c6, it's hard to evaluate moves that look cool because you're already predisposed to want to play them, right? You feel good about yourself when you play this move. But let's actually calculate what happens here. Black plays queen takes e6, right? And as a consequence of this, what have you gained? Well, you've reestablished material equality, not for long, as we will see. But you've traded all of the pieces. Your entire initiative has evaporated. You've cashed in your initiative for a measly pawn And not even that, because if you calculate until the end of the line, you will see that black can safely take the pawn on a2. Now, I don't think that white's necessarily worse here. I think that after something like rook c7, you could argue that white's rook activity gives full compensation for the pawn, but this is clearly not the way to win the game, right? Does that make sense? So you have to calculate such lines to their natural conclusion. Bishop d6 blunders the bishop. That's why he put a knight on f7. That doesn't work either. Another proposal from some people was the move rook takes d7. That has to be calculated. Unfortunately, I don't think it works either. Queen takes d7, bishop takes c6, right? And I feel like black can even drop the queen back to e8. And despite appearances, I feel like black is holding everything together. I mean, queen c4, you could try to pressure black, but there are really no threats here. I mean, knight a5, I feel like this gets really, really chaotic, and it's not clear to me that white is full compensation. What about bishop a4 after the exchange sack? Well, bishop a4 after the exchange sack, black can defend the knight with a rook ac8. The knight can be protected too many times. You will not be able to win this knight. Okay, so now let me tell you what my idea was, now that I gave you some time to think about this position. My intended move, and I'm not claiming that this is the best move or that this is such an amazing move, I'm just going to tell you how I thought about this. The bishop on d7 is a type 2 undefended piece. A while ago, I introduced these concepts in the first speedrun. A type 1 undefended piece is a piece that is unprotected by any other pieces or pawns. A type 2 undefended piece is a piece that is only protected by one other piece, right? And any piece that's protected by a pawn is automatically considered defended. So how many type 2 undefended pieces does black have? Well, there's two of them. There's the knight on c6, which is only protected by the bishop. And there's the bishop, which is only protected by the queen. Now, technically, the rook on a8 is also a type 2 undefended piece. But the point of these concepts is to help you look at the position. You're not going to, there's going to be no tactic that exploits this rook on a8. It's out of the way completely. Right. So you could think about that and say, okay, the bishop on d7, when I look at this position, it looks vulnerable to me. Right? When I look at this position, I'm like, okay, the rook's pressuring the knight, the other rook's pressuring the bishop. There's something about this construction that seems very vulnerable to me. So I would start by exploring ways in which we could put pressure on either the bishop or the knight. Now, one way we could put pressure on the knight is bishop a4. Some of you proposed this move. Unfortunately, black has an easy way to defend the knight, rook ac8. But let's consider whether we can attack the bishop. What if we play the move queen d2 or queen d3? Well, this is a little bit more meaty. Because you might say, well, wait a second, black can just go rook fd8. But don't stop calculating. Here, white has a devastating move. And Artie Bear found it, and that move is bishop f4 to c7. Attacking the rook, dislodging it, and then winning the bishop, or the exchange. So my intended move is actually queen d3. Attacking the bishop. The bishop is only one square, and that's e8. And I already think that white has gained a lot by forcing this incredibly awkward move to appear on the board. Can't you add another attacker or two after bishop a4? Not really. You don't have any attackers. Now, I don't know if I would have played queen d3, queen d2. One of these two moves. Here, I even would consider bishop to d6 now. And if you consider what happens after the trade, well, after the trade, white gets a tremendous initiative. Look at the piece activity here. And black is really, really, really tied down. So maybe black is okay here, but I figured that this would be a very interesting practical chance. What if knight e5? Where? Oh, if knight e5 here, then we just take it. We win the piece. Because we're defending the e5 square enough times to where eventually the bishop's going to be undefended. So queen d3 or queen d2 was my intended move. But the main thing you have to see is rook d8, bishop c7. This is actually the main line. If you don't see this move, then you're not going to play queen d3. In the rook takes d7 line, was there bishop f7 for white? Goes Bonsai Grower. Here, here, here. Oh, there actually is. Ooh. Look at you. That's a great move. I didn't see bishop takes f7. That's a phenomenal move. Because if the queen takes, then you drop the knight. And if the rook takes, then you take the queen. And then you take the knight, and the knight defends e1. Okay, so I would have to amend my thought there and say that, okay, queen b7. Queen b7 is probably what would deter me from this. I hope my thought process was clear on why I would play queen d3. In the game, black plays knight a5. How do you find the move bishop d5? Well, in general, anytime you have a piece that has no squares left, you should thank you, Chilbersaurus Rex, for the prime. There we go. Now I'm starting to guilt people. And Neblivion with a prime. So anytime you have a situation like this where the rook has no squares, you should automatically think about ways to attack it. In addition, consider the standoff between the queens. Black's queen is a type 1 undefended piece, which means that the pawn is pinned, which means that you should see bishop d5, right? That's not a hard move to see. You should see it. This is a move that you should see. The thing is, rook c7 first, we cannot switch the move order. If we play rook c7 and then bishop d5, the queen is now defended. So that's not possible. One piece of advice I would have for you is if you find yourself looking at this and saying it, unless you're a beginner, right? If you're like 14 or 1500 and you're like, I don't see bishop d5 and I feel like I would never see this move. When my students say this phrase, I push back and I say, why do you say that? Like, what is it about this move that you think you would never see? What aspect of the position do you have a hard time identifying? And then whichever aspect of the position you feel like doesn't occur to you naturally is what you need to spend more time on in general. You need to spend more time on thinking about. So bishop d5, attacking the rook and trapping it. Bishop a6, and now we redirect and we take on e6. By the way, if bishop b7, then we have rook c7 if we wanted. That's a fork. Yeah, looking for undefended pieces is really the majority of tactical thinking in general. Obviously, e takes d5 blunders the queen. So everything checks out here. Bishop a6, queen e6, and now we transition into this endgame where we're much better. Rather than just dropping the bishop back, we preserve the pin. And the last comment that I wanted to make in this game, because the rest of the game is very obvious. What happens if black plays king h8 in order to unpin the knight on f7? So all of a sudden we play b4. We play b4. Okay, the knight's hanging. Knight b7. Now we play bishop f7. We give up that bishop. And then we trap black's bishop with b5. Okay, one at a time. Can you explain rook c7? What do you mean? Where? We didn't play it, though. Where would you like me to explain it? Wasn't bishop d6 winning in exchange? Well, I explained this during the game. The other bishop is hanging. Black takes on e6, and then black takes on f8, and black gets 2 pieces for the rook, which is not good for white. All right, so you have to defend this bishop first. So knight d4. Bishop c8. No, it's all good. Yeah, loose pieces drop off is good because it's been around for a long time. Bishop d5, Zen move. Just drop the bishop back. Clear the e6 square for the knight. Threaten bishop d6. And obviously, a computer could probably defend this for black, but from a human perspective, this is garbage. I mean, this is horrible, miserable. Bishop b7, and now knight e6. And now we have to calculate, right? Bishop takes d5, knight takes f8. Now, more resilient by our opponent would have been to take on a2. But then our knight has a very safe square on d7, where it is protected by the rook on d1. How did rook c7 work with the fork? Oh, absolutely. If we rewind a little bit, I made a poorly explained point. If bishop b7, I said, we have the possibility of playing rook c7. Why is this a fork? Well, what are we forking, right? Well, we're attacking the queen, right? The bishop defends the rook, so that's good. And if the queen moves away, then we have 2 attackers on b7, and black has only 1 defender. So we can take on b7 and win a piece. But, if you are in the situation with black, and if you were listening carefully to how I was describing this, what should black do in this position? What is the most resilient defensive move for black? Queen d8 does not help. We still take on b7. This actually makes things worse. Take the rook, yes. So people forget about this all the time. The concept of giving up your queen for a significant amount of material. You can give your queen for a rook and a piece. Black has a knight, a rook, and a pawn for the queen. White is better. No question that white is better. Just the last point here is that the critical aspect of playing these positions is to focus on piece activity rather than focusing on pawns. So, of course, you could win the game by playing b3, but I really wanted to illustrate the impact of 2 active rooks and what that can do to your position. I mean, this is a complete game changer. We don't give a damn about the b2 pawn. And the game-winning move is h4. We're creating Luft. We're setting up rook c7. And we're basically playing that move against anything. What would you do after rook e7? What would be white's most accurate move here? Who can tell me? Yeah, so we want to give this check. Rook comes back to e8, and now rook c7. Classic technique. Just remember this technique. And the game is over. And that's it. After rook d8, we take on a7. We get the other rook to the 7th rank, counter-attacking the knight on f7. We take on f7, take g7, takes h7. And now the classic technique to trade rooks in such a position. Rook g7, king f8, bang. Rook h8, forcing the king to take. We take the rook on d8, and we win the game easily. Okay, so the interesting part of this game really occurred in the first 25, 30 moves. After that, it was just a completely winning endgame. But look at the pressure that we managed to put with the Smith-Morra. And so I think we're beginning to prove that the Smith-Morra, it survives even the highest level. And I think that's what makes Mark's book so amazing. He's not just giving you like gimmicky analysis. This is analysis at like a title player level. So this is a lifetime opening, provided, of course, that you study knight f6 very carefully, because at higher levels, people begin playing this, and the Alpen Sicilian is by no means boring. And if you want to hear something interesting, if you want a little bit of inspiration, so I have another book. Yeah, he had a winning position against Anandi, beat Van Wely. This is called Squeezing the Sicilian. It's on the Alpen. It's 400 pages. I would say about 200 of them are on knight f6. So if you're a Morra player, you need to realize that this is also an interesting line. This is not a draw. This is not dry. This is very much congruent with the types of positions you want to get. I used to play the Alpen full-time until I was about 1900. We played it on the first speedrun. So if you want to learn more about this particular line, I would start. I think Mark might propose queen takes d4, which is an interesting sideline. You can look this up as well. This is legit. It has, it's sensible. But if you want to play the main lines, you can look at all of the Alpen games from my speedrun, and you shouldn't just get discouraged every time somebody plays knight f6, because this is also a cool line. So my official Naroditsky recommendation against c5 is either the Alpen or the Morra, or, as usually happens, a combination of both. Okay,